of breath because I just held up all those books and it was hard. Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to be wrapping up my 2022 TBR. For the second year in a row, well basically the second year in a row, I actually managed to complete my set yearly TBR. It was a little touch and go there for a while, but I somehow managed to read all 12 books that I set myself at the beginning of the year, and I'm really excited to kind of wrap all of that up with you, to share my thoughts, feelings, opinions, and give you a definitive ranking of these 12 books that I aimed to read this year. My TBR for 2022 was the same as it was for 2021 in that I decided to do a 5-star predictions list. I had a moderate amount of success doing that in 2021, so I figured why mess with a good thing. And so in 2022, I picked 12 more books that I thought were going to be 5-star reads, and I had a pretty varied result, but overall I had a really good time with pretty much every single book that I picked for myself in 2022. I'm really glad that I managed to get these books read. These are books that were on my TBR for various lengths of time, and so it's nice to have at least cut it down by this amount of books. I will leave a link to my original TBR down in the description if you want to go and see what I originally said about each of these books and why I thought they would end up being 5-star reads. I'm going to sort of recap it a little bit in this video, but for the most part this is going to be me reviewing all 12 of these books and telling you if they were indeed 5 stars and kind of ranking them in terms of my enjoyment. I think that's everything that the intro needs, so let me go ahead and jump right in. I am going to start with the book that I liked the least and work my way up to the book that I liked the most. Keep in mind, some of these books I read fairly recently and have talked about in recent videos, so it might seem a little bit repetitive, especially when we get towards the end. And also just a heads up that some of these books will be showing up in my favorites and least favorites of the year list coming out at the beginning of January. So I'm not quite done talking about these books. I'm going to try to keep it as brief and concise as possible, but we all know me. I might not be able to do that. So coming in at number 12 is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is the story of Achilles and the Trojan War told from the perspective of Patroclus, who is a companion to Achilles and his eventual lover. This book spans many years before, during, and a little bit after the Trojan War, and it was a time. So I originally thought that this would be a 5-star read because 1, everybody and their mother seems to love this book, and 2, I have read other books by Madeline Miller. I read Circe a few years ago and I really enjoyed it, so I figured that this would be a book that I could jump into knowing that I already liked the author's writing style, and it might be like kind of that emotional gut punch that everybody claimed it was going to be. I hated this. I absolutely hated this. And honestly, in hindsight, I probably should not have put this as a 5-star prediction because I don't like Achilles and I have never liked a book that's about Achilles. So I'm not really sure why I really thought this was going to be 5 stars, other than everybody kept telling me, or I kept seeing it everywhere, that it was like a 5-star read. It really had a bit of a resurgence on TikTok this year, and I think that that's why it was so like at the forefront of my brain. I wanted to like it, but I just didn't. I found the characters to be incredibly annoying. I didn't like the writing style. What I loved about Circe, the writing that I loved in Circe, I hated in here. It just didn't work for me, unfortunately. I don't really understand the hype for it. It's definitely not a book that I would recommend. It even has me questioning whether or not Circe was actually good, or if I just bought into the hype of that one. I don't know, just wasn't for me. I didn't like it and I gave it 2 stars, unfortunately. So, and that's probably even generous. Next up, coming in at number 11 is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is about an AI, or an AF, an artificial friend, named Clara. She's currently for sale in a store that specializes in artificial friends, and her dream is to be taken home by the perfect little girl. One day, while she is in the window display, she sees a girl outside and she thinks, that is my friend, that is who I'm meant for. Several weeks later, the girl comes back and does indeed pick Clara as her AF, and this book is just about Clara's sort of coming to understand the world and life and relationships, even though she is an AI, she's a robot. This was on my 5-star predictions because, similarly to The Song of Achilles, I had previously read a book by this author, Never Let Me Go, and it is one of my favorite books. And while I did think that this book had a lot of really interesting things to say, and I definitely didn't dislike it, I wanted so much more from it. I really felt like the author did not do a great job of fully developing the characters in this book. I understand that Clara is an AF, so she's a robot. She doesn't process human emotions and feelings the same way humans do, obviously, but I just felt like we could have gone deeper. I felt like I was being held at arm's length the whole story. There's this like subplot having to do with illness that I never really felt was fully developed, and it didn't have a satisfying conclusion. And so unfortunately, this was not a 5-star read for me. It really just disappointed me, and I'm bummed about it. Next up, coming in at number 10 is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is about a woman named Rosemary who is trying to escape some stuff in her past, and so she joins the crew of the Wayfarer. The other beings on the ship are a variety of species and genders and sexualities. At the beginning of the book, the crew has recently decided to take a new job, and so they are sort of traveling to this new place, and there's some political upheaval in this galaxy at the time. So Rosemary is trying to escape her past, but also sort of gets caught up in some new drama. What I didn't love about this was that it didn't really have a focused story. It feels a little bit more episodic. Each chapter they're in a different kind of location and they're doing a different thing. There never really was like a clear plot to this one. It is much more like character focused, and I kind of wanted a little bit more action, a little bit more adventure from the story. I liked the characters, and I felt like we did get to know all of the characters really well. I just sort of was disappointed by the execution of this book. I wanted a little bit more from it. It wasn't exactly what I expected. I went into it thinking it was going to be one thing, a little bit more of an action-packed space opera sort of situation, but what I got was really just like these people living on the ship in their day-to-day lives, and there's also some drama and political upheaval, but it's sort of in the background. When I read this, I was kind of in the mood for something a little bit more action-packed, so I think that's why I didn't like it as much as I was hoping to. I definitely plan on continuing on in the series, but this just wasn't the perfect book for me. Next up, I've got Ray Bear by Jordan E. Fueko. This is the first book in a YA fantasy duology. It follows a girl named Tarisai, who at the beginning of the first book is given the mission to go to the capital of this kingdom that she lives in, befriend the future emperor, join his council, and then kill him. And during the years where the future emperor is choosing his council, kind of a competition like setting, Tarisai becomes friends with the future emperor, and so it starts having her question her future and what she's meant to do, and whether or not the things that she's been told her whole life are actually the truth. I liked it so much, and I thought it was so much fun. I really liked how political it was. I liked all of the different places in this book, all the different countries and settings, and all the different people that we meet. I did feel like there was a bit of confusion when it came to the magic system. I felt like it needed a little bit more explanation on why certain things happened and how they happened, but I am really interested to continue on in this duology because the first book leaves up on a bit of a cliffhanger and definitely has me excited to continue on and read book 2. Overall, this wasn't a 5-star read. I'd probably give it like 3.5, 4 stars, but I did really enjoy it. I plan on continuing on in this series, and I do think that all the hype for this book is absolutely real and well deserved. Next book on my list is one that I talked about just recently, and that is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is the first book in, again, a YA fantasy duology that is set in 1920s Shanghai, and it is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. The Romeo and Juliet characters in this book are named Roma and Juliet, and they are the heirs to rivaling mafia families. At the start of the book, a monster has sort of been unleashed on Shanghai, and so Roma and Juliet team up to figure out what exactly is going on, what caused this outbreak, and how they can save their city. And all the while they are sort of dealing with the fact that 4 years prior to the start of the book, they had a bit of a romance that caused a lot of problems in their respective families, and so they're still kind of dealing with the fallout of all of that. I feel like I've given that synopsis, that pitch, so many times recently because, like I said, I did just talk about this not only in a vlog but also in my mid-December wrap-up. Again, not a 5-star read. I'd give it probably like 3.5 stars. There were so many things about this that I wanted to love. I really loved the idea of a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. I really loved the idea of this like 1920s Shanghai setting, and unfortunately it just didn't deliver on all the fronts that I wanted it to. I didn't think that the Romeo and Juliet aspects of this book were particularly well developed. I felt like there was a severe lack of parallels between the two things, like Romeo and Juliet and These Violent Delights. I felt like it was marketed completely incorrectly because it was not a fantasy book. There was not really a fantastical element, but overall I did think it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed my time reading it. I read this and the sequel back to back, so I think that that is also kind of coloring my enjoyment of this first book because I liked the second book more, and when I think about them in tandem. I didn't love this, and it wasn't a 5-star read, but I did really enjoy it and I would recommend it, and I'm really interested to read more from Chloe Gong in the future. Next up, coming in at number 7 is Permanent Record by Mary H.K. Choi. This is a YA contemporary story following a boy named Pablo who is not really sure what he's doing with his life. He's been in a bit of a rut. He's dropped out of school. He's got a mountain of debt and he's barely like treading water. He doesn't really know how to get back on his feet. And at the beginning of the book, he meets a like teen TV star slash pop star, I think like a Disney Channel actress in the mid 2000s kind of person. They sort of become friends and then a relationship forms from there, and she kind of helps him figure out exactly what he's doing and where he's going with his life. I put this on my 5-star predictions list because I really loved Emergency Contact by the same author. It was a 5-star read for me in 2021, so I felt sure that I was going to love this just as much. And while I didn't love it just as much, I did really enjoy it and I'm glad that I read it. I've talked quite a bit recently about how I'm not really super into YA anymore. I do still read some YA fantasy, obviously, but I've moved away from reading YA contemporary for the most part, and for some reason Mary H.K. Choi is like the one exception to that. I love her writing, I love her characters, I love her stories, and I'm really glad that I read this. I loved the ending. I felt like even though it wasn't maybe necessarily exactly what I wanted, it is something that I have constantly gone back to and thought about over and over. Like that was the perfect ending for this book. And while I haven't read Mary H.K. Choi's most recent release yet, it is so high on my priority list because I definitely enjoyed this and I'm so eager to read more from her. Next up is The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi. This was my first book by this author and I really enjoyed it. This is about a boy named Vivek Oji who at the very beginning of the book you find out has died, and it's sort of a mystery. You basically spend the whole book leading up to Vivek's death and what led to that. You get to see his relationship with some of his friends in his town and also his very close relationship that he has with his cousin. I feel like the biggest strength of this book boils down to the absolutely beautiful writing. I felt like there were some moments in the plot itself that I didn't totally love, but I could sort of look past that stuff because I just was so engrossed in the writing and the storytelling and just the way that Akwaeke Emezi crafted these characters and this story. Again, not a 5-star read, unfortunately, not a perfect book for me. There were some things about it that I didn't love, but overall I'm so eager to read more from this author. I think that this author could become a 5-star author for me, and I am really glad that I read this. Moving in to the top 5, number 5 on my list is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm a big Taylor Jenkins Reid fan. We all know this. I've talked about her on my channel endlessly. It follows 4 siblings, the children of Mick Riva, who is a character that we have seen in pretty much every Taylor Jenkins Reid book since The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. The main sort of structure of this story centers around a party that the oldest daughter Nina is throwing at her house, and over the course of the book this seemingly idyllic set of siblings sort of unravels at this party. We're also flashing back to seeing the mom of these 4 siblings fall in love with Mick Riva and the sort of ups and downs of that relationship, and we also kind of see what led each sibling to where they are. I really love the way she crafts characters. I love the intense family dynamics that are present in this story. I really was rooting for every single character. The only reason that this was not a 5-star read for me was because every once in a while in this book we would flash to the perspectives of other partygoers that weren't really relevant to the story, and every time we flashed to someone else it just sort of took me out of the book. But when I was with the siblings, I was really into it. So I did love it. It's not my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book, but I did really enjoy it. And again, I'm glad that I read it. Next up, coming in at number 4 is Jade City by Fonda Lee. This is the first book in an adult fantasy series. Another one that I've talked about a lot this year because I just absolutely loved this book. Like I said, this is the first book in an adult fantasy trilogy that is set on the fictional island of Kekon, and it follows 4 siblings who are all sort of in charge of the No Peak clan, which is kind of like the ruling clan of this city. The book follows these 4 siblings as they navigate the incredibly political nature of the city and also the drama within their own family. The magic system in this book centers around the use of jade, so people can like wear it or they put it in their skin and it increases their abilities, their fighting abilities, their perception, stuff like that. My favorite part of this book, hands down, was the really complicated relationships that these 4 siblings have. I think that they are some of the most interesting characters that I've ever read, and I loved reading from each of their perspectives. There wasn't a single one of the main 4 perspectives in this book that I didn't absolutely love, and every single time we switched much to them. I was so excited to find out more about their story. Not only do we follow the 4 siblings, but we do get some one-off chapters from some other characters that are involved in their lives in various ways. And even those perspectives added so much to the story. I loved this. I'm so mad that I waited so long to get around to reading this series because people have been saying for years how great the Green Bone Saga is, and I should have listened a lot sooner. I'm also incredibly frustrated with myself that I haven't continued on and read Jade Ward yet because it's been sitting on my shelf unread for the past few months, and I need to get to it. I loved this. I can't wait to continue on in the trilogy, and obviously I would highly recommend it. If you haven't read this series yet, please give it a go. Number 3 on my list is another recent read, and that is The Martian by Andy Weir. Surprisingly so close to the top of this list. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this. I mean, I thought I would love it because so many people love it. I loved Project Hail Mary, but I really wasn't sure, given that this is the author's first book, if it was truly going to become a new favorite, and it's amazing. This is about an astronaut named Mark Watney who gets stranded on Mars after his mission fails and his crew has to abandon him. They believe him dead, and so he is basically having to figure out how to survive on Mars, waiting for someone to come rescue him. And obviously there's an added layer of nobody knows that he's alive, so he has to figure out how to communicate with NASA and his ship, his crew, to let them know that he's alive and needs to be brought home. This balanced the humor with the serious, it balanced the science with the action, it balanced everything so well. I was so invested in Mark's journey. I loved every second of the reading experience, and at the end of the book I actually ended up crying. I was really surprised at how emotional this book made me, and I really wasn't expecting it, which is another reason why it ended up being so high on my list for the year, because it truly blew me away. I'm really mad that I didn't read it sooner, and I can't wait to read more from Andy Weir in the future. Finally, we're down to my top 2 books from my 2022 TBR, and spoiler alert for my favorite books of the year video, these are my top 2 books of the year as well. It's been a while since I read a book that I could consider a new, like, all-time favorite book, and here we are with 2 of them. One of them was one of the very first reads that I read this year. The other one is one of the last reads I read this year. And they're fairly interchangeable in terms of like which one I enjoyed more. If you ask me tomorrow, the order would probably be switched because it's basically just like any given day what my mood is on which of these I liked more. But for today, coming in at number 2 is Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. This was the second book that I read in January and has remained at the top of my list all year long. This is about a bank robbery turned hostage situation gone completely wrong. I don't really want to say much more than that because it's just one of those books that you need to go into it and experience it for yourself. It's so funny and heartfelt and warm and just great. It tackles so many hard topics. We get to see a lot of really flawed characters just trying to do their best. It's one of those books that I read at exactly the perfect moment for me because I was having a bit of a crisis. And then I read this and the book basically just told me, like, it's okay to not be okay. You're doing your best, and as long as you're doing your best, then that's all that matters. When I read it, I needed to hear that so bad that it literally, it broke me. It's one of those books that I just happened to read it at the exact perfect moment in my life, and so it's like a forever favorite for me now. I loved this, I loved this, I loved this. I hope that everybody will go and read Anxious People because it is absolutely amazing. And coming in at number 1, my favorite book from my 2022 TBR is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. Another recent read. I just talked about this one in my November wrap up. This is about a man named Zachary Ezra Rollins who is in grad school, and he's in the library one day and he finds this mysterious book on the shelf and he starts reading it, and he quickly realizes that parts of this book sort of mirror his own life. It sets him on this journey of discovering what exactly this book is, who wrote it, why he's in it, and what the Starless Sea is. The writing is impeccable. The characters are dynamic. The relationships, again, complicated, complex. I loved them. I loved this book. It had everything for me. Magic, romance, adventure, just action after action, so much complexity. I loved the structure of this story. I felt like the author did a really great job of bringing this world to life. The characters felt real and tangible to me, which is something I always appreciate, especially when I'm reading something like this, which is mostly fantasy but still feels real somehow. I loved this. It was so good. I'm so glad that I read it. I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. My favorite book off of my 2022 TBR. Probably my favorite book of the year. Like I said, ask me tomorrow and Anxious People will probably be my number 1 of the year. Who knows what's gonna happen when I actually get around to filming my favorite books of the year video, but this is up there. This is definitely 1 or 2. It's amazing. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. Please go read it. So that is it. That is the wrap up of my 2022 TBR. Such a great year for books. I only had one sort of dud this year, which was great. I didn't DNF any of the books, which was great. I'm just so glad that I managed to stick to this yearly TBR, that I finished it, and I'm glad that I found some new favorites. I'm glad that for the most part it was an overall success. I've decided that in 2023 I'm gonna switch things up. I'm not going to be doing a 5-star predictions again in 2023, but something I'm equally as excited about and hope I will find just as many gems next year or more than I did this year. So that is gonna do it for this video. Please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to me? I'd really love to know. Were any of my 5-star predictions 5-star reads for you? I'd really love to know that as well. Also, let me know some of your 5-star reads for 2022. I'd love to know that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again in a few days. Bye!